Hello, everyone, and welcome to a brand new episode of the Jams and Tea podcast, where we spin the jams and spill the tea. And this week, we're coming at you with a brand new episode where we're talking about two new releases from two artists. This is a bit of a theme this week. We're going to be talking about two collaborations, two high-profile collaborations, as a matter of fact. We're talking about the collaboration record of Danger Mouse and Black Thought of The Roots. We're going to be talking about cheat codes, and we're also going to be talking about the collaboration between Panda Bear of Animal Collective and Sonic Boom. Animal Collective, what a year. And this week's record club is Ryley's recommended record, which is Colin Stetson's To See More Light. So go check that out. Expect that in the weeks to come on the channel. This previous week, we just uploaded our fast food tier list, which is an hour of good old-fashioned shit posting, a very American video, if there ever was one. We also talked about Gospel's The Moon is a Dead World, just because we showered their new record with praise, so it's only fitting that we talk about their first album and do the exact same thing. So if you haven't heard that record, go hear that record, go listen to that episode, go do all the things.
Yeah, it's been a great week for the channel, as is always every week, because we only put out great videos.
Yeah.
Except for the bad ones.
Let's get into what we've been listening to for the past week. Jake, what have you been listening to?
I think I have this phase every once in a while where I regress a little bit, and much to my shame, I have to listen to a lot of Tool. Surprised I've never really
You really don't, bro.
I mean, here's the thing though, is that I love Tool. I also am deeply embarrassed that I love Tool because they have one of the most insufferable progressive music fan bases ever. They're all like 40-year-old guys that watch Rick Beato and think that they're above everyone because they listen to the hashtag real music.
They're either 40-year-old guys who watch Rick Beato or 20-year-old guys who watch Rick and Morty. Either way,
and
someone named Rick
Beato
is involved.
Probably a little bit of both, if we're being honest. We're like, I'm not even kidding. Down to
Has there
Rick
ever
and
been
Morty,
a good person named Rick?
down to Rick and Morty,
Rick
Tool,
Roll,
and Rick Beato.
Rick Dalton.
I love Rick Roll's famous song. Never gonna give you.
If only someone in Tool was named Rick, I could seamlessly loop back into being on topic. But I guess the one notable thing about my re-listen to these is that I
Rick Tool. Shut up. You're a Rick Tool.
I used to be not a huge fan of Lateralis, and I think it was just because I think half of it was just because I kind of wanted to be, just because that's a very not immediate record. I think is safe for like that first initial run of tracks. Like if you're not well acquainted with what Tool or progressive metal are as a whole, that's sort of an album that just kind of, it can whoosh right over.
So there's like at least six different meme moments on that album, so it can be a little bit difficult to take seriously.
It starts with a garage band sound effect that you hear in the first Scream movie when the garage door kills that bitch.
That's actually a pretty fucking sick sample choice, to be honest.
I can never get that out of my head. But I feel like
with the best Tool song.
I mean, that is not at all a bad take. There's so many great songs on here. There's Grudge, there's The Patient. I mean, like it's one of the most beloved albums ever for a reason. And I finally like hit that up to a 9. It's still not my favorite Tool album, but it's been a bit of a journey, just because I did in my younger years think that it was a little bit boring, and I can still understand that to a degree, just because a lot of it is very heavy, psychedelic, and
so
just
long.
Anima frustrates the shit out of me, because it's like, here are 3 of the hardest progressive industrial metal songs of all time, and then like a fourth song that's just like 2.5 minutes of like just like them just shitting and farting for like no reason. Like,
I mean, yeah, I mean that's the thing is that
Yes.
Tool could shit in their hands and clap and put it on a song, and people would be like, "Oh, it's a pioneer of progressive metal."
Isn't
and
isn't that what
And you
that
know
one
what? I
band
think
is
that's
called?
I think that's a dub for Tool. The fact that they can do that and people will defend it. I think, you know what? Credit to them for cultivating that. That's impressive.
No, I gotta say, isn't that what that one band is called?
Fuck
Shit in your
you.
hands and say yes.
But the thing is, like, I mean, I guess with the exception of Faib de Wade, which is only 2 minutes,
And Eon
Lateralis,
Blue Apocalypse.
which is only 1 minute. Lateralis really doesn't have
Yes,
any
you're
of
right.
that shit, which I think is what really saves it and makes it like so satisfying as a holistic record. You know, it is a bit exhausting by the time you get to Reflection, and that is a really long song, even though it's perfect. It's just like, I can only take so much. But I don't know. I'm so in my bag for that album that I will just relentlessly defend. And actually, realizing how much I love that album has retrospectively made me appreciate Anima and 10,000 Days even more. Despite the fact that I think I have the most complicated relationship I have with any Tool album is with 10,000 Days, which I think does have like an utterly fucking perfect first half right up to and including the pot. And then it just loses me for like
that's
half
the
of the
I
rest
love
of it.
10,000 Days so much that I'm just like every time I listen to it, I'm just like trying in my head to I'm bargaining with like holding myself hostage at gunpoint to be like, no, maybe Blame Hoffman's good actually.
It's really not.
No.
But I
it's
feel you
not.
though. I feel you.
Like,
You want to do that, and
especially
Tool
because
make you do
fucking
that.
Rosetta Stone Intention and Right Into is 25 minutes of flawless music right afterwards. So you're just kind of like again, like 10,000 Days doesn't have the least amount of bullshit, but it has the most like emotionally evocative songs on there. I do think that like Vicarious Through the Pot is just like the best run of Tool songs, and fucking 10,000 Days, the title track, is just like the best thing ever. Like as like listening to that band just like reject all of their like shitty caveman brain shit, which I do enjoy for the record, but they move away from the whole like fucking astrology, blah, Saturn ascends, not 1 but 10. I love Lateralis. Shut the fuck up. I'm allowed to make fun of it. But they move into like singing songs that are like emotionally tangible and that you don't have to like look up on some shitty GeoCities website that has like explained all of the songs and what they mean. That's like from 2002. But still, I do hesitantly love Tool. It's just that they make it hard. Anyway, I have been listening to other things other than Tool. One of them being a really interesting 2022 release, that being an album that stayed pretty steadfastly in the top 50 on Rate Your Music, that I had added but just like put on the backlog just because I'd never heard of this artist before, never listened to anything from them, but I was just like, oh, I'll get to it eventually, and I got around to it. And that is Death's Dynamic Shroud, their album Transcendence Bot. And if you don't know anything about Death's Dynamic Shroud, they are a vaporwave and plunderphonics artist who have made an obscene amount of music. This is not even the only album that they've released this year, in fact. And they actually have a number of pretty like well-acclaimed, beloved releases that I've downloaded since. And so I had like no frame of reference for them going into this, and I'm not really well acquainted, but I've listened to some stuff and like some vaporwave, but not enough to be like wholly familiar with it. But I was really interested to see it have these tags, and it also had a tag that was like cyber metal. And I was like, what the fuck is cyber metal? I'll listen to this shit. And cyber metal really is just like a really grindcore that's made like with purely like with sampling and stuff. And so there are moments on this album Transcendence Bot that are like really heavy, but it's also like it's a mix of so many different things. I have no idea if any given person would listen to this and like it. Like there's no way. I have no clue what you three would think of this album if you heard it. I have a sneaking suspicion that you'd all just be like whatever, but it's still fascinating. There's some moments on here that are just like really disgusting sounding. There's like a body horror sort of element to it that like mixes like the overall tone of this album is really like kind of triumphant and like really really emotional, and you really feel that through all of this like really expertly deployed sampling that makes these really diverse set of tracks. Like sometimes they can be super heavy and like metallic, sometimes they can be like really more ethereal, like stuff on the back half or the closer. And then there's a song like something in like the middle here called Over Again, which is one of the best fucking songs of the year. It's basically a pop song, and oh, it has the best dance groove I've heard this side of like the Beyonce album we talked about last week. It's so infectious. It's so fun. This album it's a bit of a grower, but it's short and you'll not hear anything else like it. Like I've listened to a couple other tracks from the band and they like no two tracks really sound alike, but nothing has like reminded me of this in particular. It's really like there's like a lot of genre stuff and there's like a lot of eclectic ways you can describe it, but I can have described the appeal as very primal. It scratches an itch, and I highly recommend it. I really enjoy it. It's probably like definitely in the upper quadrant of records that I've heard this year, and certainly one of the most unique. And on that note, I saw the cyber metal tag and I was just like, I'm curious, are there other cyber metal albums? And turns out this is a very niche genre, and no, there are not a lot of albums with this tag. There are even fewer albums with a particularly high rating with this tag, but the one with the highest rating is an album called the Jun Xun Protectorate by a band called Khonsu, the like the Egyptian god. And this album is fucking awesome. I had no idea what to expect just because that tag applied to that previous album, but it was still only in spurts. But this is more like progressive, very like melodic, very Opeth-esque, but also it's like really industrial too. Like, you know, Nine Inch Nails, Skinny Puppy kind of like hard-edged industrial, or even like early Ministry or something like that. But it's really like progressive death metal primarily, and it's this big futuristic concept album, and it fucking rips. Like there's some of the parts on here that do really live up to that cyber metal tag, where it just kind of feels like your brain is being drilled into with dental tools. I can't describe it in a way that makes it sound pleasant, but it's always awesome. And it really just doesn't let up. It's a super consistent record. I had a really, really good time with this, and I really want to check out their other albums, just because this is a band that, if they're able to summon the juice that is on this record in any capacity whatsoever on other albums, I'm fucking here for it. It's a really, really good project. I also listened to a doom metal album from maybe the doom metal band, as far as I'm concerned, is for the 21st century, that being Sleep. Stoner metal, doom metal giants. They had a little bit of a comeback with the album The Sciences, which is a terrific record that everyone should hear if they like doom metal or Black Sabbath. But they also have albums like Dope Smoker, which is, you know, stoner metal classic. And I listened to what I would say is maybe the definitive album from them, which is Sleep's Holy Mountain. And aside from the fact that the mixing on this album is a little weird, and that I had to constantly adjust the volume levels of this album just because it is inexplicably sometimes loud and sometimes quiet to a degree where you like are just like, why is it like this? And that issue aside, this is terrific shit. It's really, really hard on the Sabbath worship, but it almost leans into their later, like right before the pre-Dio era, like Sabbath, Bloody Sabbath, and Sabotage, but like less prog and more just like big, chunky stoner metal riff. This is a good album to perhaps maybe imbibe to, if you know what I'm talking about. It is
Smoke and
heavy.
reefer.
That's compulsory, isn't it? While listening to sleep.
Basically, and I would say this is maybe one of the best album other than the Sciences to listen to while doing. I mean, the Sciences literally has a song called Marijuana Knot, which is just perfect.
It's the fella. It's that fella on the cover.
There he is.
That's like
the
guy.
fella.
Laying it on so thick, and I really appreciate it.
They on that album, they literally have a song that's named after Geezer Butler from Black Sabbath. And it's
It's
like
a pun,
pyramids
though.
of Giza.
Yeah, exactly. It's a pun on the pyramids.
Giza Butler.
It's fantastic. I really do. I love Sleep. I don't love Dope Smoker as much as everyone does, just because I think that album is, like, again, Chad, yes, for doom metal and stoner metal, but it's a little monotonous. I do think that is an album that you kind of have to actually be high to properly appreciate, whereas I don't think that's the case with the Sciences and Sleep's Holy Mountain. This album and the Sciences are like fighting for my favorite of this band, but they're both just like, again, do you like the self-titled Black Sabbath? Here you fucking go. Terrific record. The last thing I'll mention here is a band that is super podcore, and also nobody fucking knows about them. They have like less than 100 reviews on this album or ratings for this record on Rate Your Music. And the band is Another Sky, and this is their debut record, I Slept on the Floor. And if I can, like, at the risk of just appealing to at least everyone who's a fan of these projects, lizard brains, this is what happens when you smash everything, and Gang of Youths together. And I know that's a weird combination, and it's also like,
that's bait.
That's just bait. But hear me out here. First of all, frontwoman, lead vocalist, has like an uncanny, like androgynously tinged Jonathan Higgs falsetto. It is so similar to his singing voice, but there is kind of a timbre that she adds to it that's really, really unique. It's a little bit more versatile on the record. That there's sort of a bit of more of a flex here happening, vocally speaking, and just instrumentally, I really do think the sort of like, both like Gang of Youths in the sense that they draw from a similar kind of heartland rock palette, and that they are a very broad, like, they are a rock band, but also like they draw from so many different areas of rock music that you can't pigeonhole them as one thing. There's something about this band that is uniquely them, and there's something, this band's songwriting is so soulful. It's very, very much in that similar vein, and there's some incredible vocal hooks on here. This is like largely self-produced, and it sounds amazing. There are some songs on here that are actual like live performances. They're just like, they're not, studio recordings. They don't have an excessive amount of overdubs, and it's indistinguishable from the actual studio production. They are so in sync. Guitar tones on here, crisp, wonderful. This is just a really evocative record. It's not very long. This is a quintessential like debut album from a band that I am convinced is going to go places. They have a go farther in lightness in them. Like, I know it, and I'm really looking forward to seeing more material from them, and I have been assured that material is in fact on the way eventually. So check out this band. They need more love. Go give their album a higher rating on Rate Your Music. It deserves it. It's a very good album.
You know what? I know what you people are here for. Fuck all this other bullshit I listened to.
Return of the Mac.
The Mac is back tonight. Not in reference to the time of day, but in reference to his album title, Tonight.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
this is
He should-
TobyMac's.
He should make a sequel to this album and call it Tonight.
I mean,
I should make a sequel to your sentence called "I'm gonna fucking kill you." This album opens up, of course, with the eponymous song Tonight, that of course features John Cooper of Skillet fame. He's on this song's hook. He's trying to like harmonize with Toby's kind of weird, eccentric rap voice, and it sounds so clunky and embarrassing. It's a horrendous train wreck start to the album, and not to mention this album sounds like shit. This is
Yeah.
garbage. The production is horrendous, and I had so much fun. And this is just our first venture into this nonsense, because I have to talk about Funky Jesus Music, perhaps the most annoying song TobyMac has ever released, where the hook is just give me that funky, funky, funky G's music.
So you're telling me this is a Corey Feldman song?
No.
yes.
Well, yes. No, but like it is, what I'm saying is this is worse than I made it sound, because those three voices have like delay and reverb on them. So you're still hearing the like funky before the next funky comes up. It's just
By the time you hear the next bop, the funky Jesus music shall be within you.
it's just absolute cancer. I think what I really took away from this album is it makes you realize just how weird Christianity is, as if his other records didn't. There is a track on here called Captured, where he describes the process of being a Christian as being captured by God, as if like this subjugation,
Hey man,
it's
look,
like
no judgment, no kink shaming.
Has the dude been dropping hints this entire time that he wants out?
It feels like it, because this is like the most like, there's no way you can phrase that and make it sound like it's a good thing. Like, you got me captured, which is how the hook goes, by the way, except in TobyMac's fucking grangly ass fucking
I'm imagining it in
voice.
my head, and there's no way it's gonna live up to how good it is in my head. I'm sorry. It just
Oh,
in
it
my head,
will
it's
Funky
be
Jesus
amazing.
music sure will, though. Let me tell you that.
Yeah.
August
So will,
hyperbole.
Grangly.
What I will say is the production is absolutely horrible, and it was nearly unlistenable in that facet. But the full frontal assault of awful on this album is so fun that I enjoyed it thoroughly. But something I've been thinking about with TobyMac as of late, I've been thinking about like TobyMac has made the most music. Now that's a weird. Now that factually is objectively false, because he has not made more music than most people
Than
who are
anyone.
like established figures. Yeah, than anyone. But I've been thinking about this. So if music could be weighed, like if it was a physical construct, Toby's music would be like a neutron star. Just a teaspoon of it would weigh like 7,000 tons.
By this logic, that means that the next album, Christmas in Diverse City, should be like, it should break all conceptions of what we know of as weight. It will implode the universe.
Oh, and Christmas in Diverse City. We're getting to that next, so don't you worry.
Oh, I can't wait for you to talk about the song
Owl City feature.
Owl City's on that album, yeah.
And you know what? I think I've kind of spoken my piece on Tonight. It's standard Toby fare. You get what you get. You don't throw a fit. But I gotta say, I'm a TobyMac connoisseur. First off, Christmas in Diverse City. Tobes, my man, listen to me. It's been 7 years. We can stop milking the taking on. We can stop milking the Diverse City train. It's done. It's over.
He wants to relive the glory days, man. He's just stuck in the past.
But this album, this is my least favorite TobyMac album. Not even gonna front. First off, call me the Grinch, but I fucking hate Christmas because it is the most corporatized bullshit in America, aside from America itself. And as a result, Christmas music is always this terrible, overproduced slop. And when you think terrible, overproduced slop, that should be in TobyMac's bag. And it is for 6 songs, because he only made the first 6 songs on this album. The rest is bullshit from his fucking entourage of idiots who he's platformed.
What, you don't fuck with Toddy Funk?
No, the second half is terrible. It's unbearable. It's the unbearable, terrible triteness of being. It's bullshit, and I hated it.
I really appreciate that reference. Coming from you of all people.
But the first half is awesome. Let's get that clear. The first half was so fun because
Cover of
the
Little Drummer Boy.
Oh, the Little Drummer Boy. Holy shit. That is a straight up dubstep song. It's so funny. It is
not the last time that dubstep will be discussed today.
The Little Dubber Boy, more like.
Yeah. True. But yes, that song, so funny. Great time. Same can be said of the first Knoll, which is the Owl City track, which
Gallagher.
It sounds like TobyMac singing or rapping rather over an Owl City track, and it's amazing. It's
Please
so
take me away from here.
Like the production, like the best thing I can say about it is that it sounds like it sounds like what I imagine death sounds like.
I don't know, August. It sounds like you'd like to make yourself believe.
And I've been thinking maybe I should listen to all the Owl City albums for a bit.
At least listen. Do they have more than one?
They have like 7.
Yeah, they've got a bunch.
What's the first one called?
Ocean Eyes has Fireflies.
Yeah. Ocean Eyes. Isn't that a Billie Eilish song? What the fuck is going on with these guys?
There is a nice moment on this TobyMac album, and this is in the first half on This Christmas, parentheses, Father of the Fatherless, which who knows how that's possible.
Yeah.
But this song has a nice little moment where we hear the whole Mac family. We hear TobyMac, Truett Mac, and other Mac, the little one. I forget what he's called. Little Mac.
Lil Mac.
We'll call him. Yeah.
Little Mac from Punch Out.
Yeah.
That's the one.
The one who got bullied on the last album.
Sorry, I don't mean to derail here. I'm still in Owl City, and I just noticed that their 2012 album, The Midsummer Station, which is the album incidentally that has Good Time, the famous song they did with Carly Rae Jepsen that sucks. But this album also has a song called Dementia on it with Mark Hoppus.
Hoppus!
And it's like life is collapsing in on itself right now. My life is just destroyed.
Wait, we've got Hoppus, we've got Blink, Angels and Airwaves. Shit! The code! Ah!
Anyway, as you were, Christmas and diversity.
I just have to say I'm looking forward to the next August has 3 studio albums left for TobyMac before the new one, which I think it's going to be interesting to see if the new album is actually put on Rate Your Music before or in time enough for August to actually rate it.
No, they're taking me. No, MK Ultra.
Nah, fair enough.
Morgan, what have you been listening to?
Yeah, Morgan.
Gorguts, From Wisdom to Hate. It's the best album that I've heard from them thus far. Perfectly synthesizes Erosion of Sanity and Obscura into one concise, extraordinarily impactful 41-minute burst of controlled insanity to such a degree that one feels enlightened by the time you reach its closing track.
It's like the film Martyrs. Like at the end, you
Yeah.
just get all the skin stripped from your body, and you're just like, I have seen the face of God.
It's
God,
it's
what a
it's, it's
record.
actually like, you know how you supposedly, like, right when you're about to die or like, I think it's freezing to death, you supposedly feel euphoric,
Yeah.
and like the couple minutes before you die, that's like that.
It's just an album where every fucking riff sounds like it's trying to tear itself apart. Just a disgusting album.
But like it's a lot more focused than Obscura, I think. And really, I will firmly plant my flag in the ground of saying that is a better move and makes for a better album.
I agree.
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty fucking difficult to come up with any critiques of that record. It is so brilliant and astonishingly powerful and satisfying as a holistic record experience. Gorguts are great with kicking the door down as their albums begin, but I don't think they have a better opening track than Inverted, which is one of my favorite. Like, I think maybe one of my top 5 tech death songs.
What a fundamentally fucked song. It doesn't even sound like it just sounds like an industrial noise track. It sounds like Swans.
Yeah, and it does a great job of like packaging these into like relatively consumable 4 or 5 minute pieces, more or less, the whole time. I am really curious to see Morgan Where You Fall on Colored Sands, especially because I feel like Jake and I have sort of hyped that record up to such a ridiculous degree. But to me, it is like very much a continuation of From Wisdom to Hate, except with more modern 2010s production, and also a whole ass concept about like genocide and historical warfare and shit that makes it like, certainly you can't exactly follow the lyrics just by listening, but like when you kind of take in how the music complements the lyrics on that thing, it becomes like so emotionally overwhelming, in addition to being all the other things that Gorguts are on their other records. I mean,
Pleiades Dust also might end up being your favorite release from this band. Their final release is like, it's like the proggiest thing that they've made, and it's like, it's so like these final 2 releases are just.
There's a strong case to be made, I think, that Gorguts have gotten better with every successive release that they've put out. I think I could completely see someone having that opinion.
I might make that case.
But anyway, yeah, I'm when I saw on your Rate Your Music, Morgan, that you'd given From Wisdom to Hate a 10, I was like, okay. I was just, because I wasn't sure whether any Gorguts album would get a 10 from you. And when I saw that, I was like, right, he's, I don't have to worry.
He sees it.
He sees it. He completely gets it. Morgan, you need to get into Ulcerate. They're kind of like, they're just.
Yeah, I've heard that one album.
Well, if you want more Gorguts and they don't make enough albums for you, like Ulcerate have like fucking 6-7 records, and they're all like a continuation of the sort of sound that Gorguts do on their most recent material. So like
Everything is Fire is like the closest death metal has come to sounding as hard as Colored Sands.
Everything is fun. I like that title.
Right? It's so badass.
Like, I don't know.
Everything
it's a
is
comforting
fire.
title. Fire when you're part of a team. Everything is fire. When you hear my dream.
So last week I basically forewent what we've been listening to. And this week, I'm pleased to say I'm not going to do that. I have some juicy segments lined up that I'm really excited to unleash. First of all, I want to talk about a brand new record that I think, well, it came onto our radars, or specifically, I guess, my radar, a little too late for us to ever really review it. It's an album that came out last month, and it is fast becoming, I think, one of the most impressive and exciting showcases of a new band doing something really, really interesting in the world of metal. And this is a band called Ashenspire. They are a Scottish avant-garde metal band. And the best way I can describe them is that they're kind of like a fusion of KO. And the Drones with like a dash of Black Country New Road in a certain sense. Like that particular comparison has been wildly overstated on, no surprises here, Rate Your Music, but the where those different collusion of influences come from is that this is an avant-garde metal band that place a heavy prominence on jazz instrumentation as well within their sound palette, particularly the saxophone of Matthew Johnson and the violin of James Johnson. I presume they're brothers. In addition to the proggier instrumentation of the prepared piano and Rhodes piano played by Scott McLean, which gives us
a good thing they didn't let their other brother on there, Boris Johnson.
Just shut up. I don't know how to respond to that.
His vocals would have been so bad. It would have ruined the tone of the album.
Spitting.
I think you really, considering this band is Scottish, I think you really couldn't have insulted them more by just saying that. So they put out a new album out last month called Hostile Architecture. And this is one of the most unique metal records that I've heard this year, a year that has been full of really unique spins on more fringe variants of metal. But the particular combinations of sounds here is really, really beguiling and super rewarding. I mean, for starters, it helps that this album has a perfect opening song, The Law of Asbestos, which is one of the best songs of the year, and definitely has some horn playing that evokes some of that Black Country New Road horn sound. And I'm going to leave that there because really that's where the comparisons end. This album achieves something really remarkable, which is that doing all these really interesting and fascinating things musically, this particular combination of prog metal, avant-garde, jazz, all that sort of stuff, and also being a record that is quite socially conscious as well, but crucially not obnoxious about that in the slightest. It's kind of like the approach to lyricism and sentiment here is kind of midway between like Deaf Heaven and Spanish love songs in terms of writing style, but with like, in the sense that you get really raw depictions of, really kind of current relevant emotions and states and feelings that are expressed in a very kind of like metal poetic way. That's what I mean by that comparison, essentially. There's a song on here called Plattenbau Persephone Praxis, which is, try saying that 10 times fast, which is kind of like a Spanish love songs type song about losing a loved one. I presume this is what it's about because, again, lyrics are open to interpretation, but it's about losing a loved one to COVID and not being able to say goodbye in person. And it has this utterly heartbreaking lyrical passage that I think will give you a good idea of what you can expect from listening to this record. Transfixed on the monitor, and I see you there and squinting, revealing these pixels depicting your fear. The marble is cold as objectification, no will of your own, still passed between unfeeling hands, with head to the glass I wept. That should give you an idea of the subject matter, the emotional tone, and the writing style on this record. And the whole record is like that. There are, dashes of songs that deal with various forms of oppression and violence and crushing, hatred that have cauterized the entire fucking planet in the last few years through a distinctly unique lens. And the fact that this is a Scottish band and the singer is recognizably Scottish, even when he's giving this very metal style vocal performance, it gives it this really distinct flair, because I haven't heard this kind of music being made by
strapcore.
Yeah, I haven't heard this kind of music being made by Scotsmen, and it gives it a distinct feel that makes it feel unique. And I mean, the first song, even if you don't listen to it out, please listen to The Law of Asbestos. It's an amazing, amazing song. Lots of references to various horrific, tragic events that have resulted from the conservative leadership. And it's just utterly gut-wrenching. There's a lyrical passage in the second track, Béton Brut, that, again, just completely leaves me gobsmacked. Stare into that void all you like. It won't meet your gaze. When you can't see the stars, you stop dreaming of space. Like, I had to take a moment when I read that shit, and I just had to process it. And the whole record is like this, right? The whole record is filled with these moments. It's a really special album. It has a really unique and awesome sound palette as well that I know will distinctly appeal to your guys' sensibilities too. So yeah, Ashenspire's Hostile Architecture, can't recommend it enough. What a unique band. And I am really, really excited that they seem to be blowing up a little bit online and doing really, really well. And now I get into a particular segment that I have been preparing for all week. Let's just stretch my muscles here for a second and just give myself a moment to take a breath so that we can talk a little bit about Muse. Because it's that time again. And believe me, I have something special for you today. So I said last week that how I was going to do this, considering that Muse's new album is coming out next week, and so we'll be reviewing it the week after, is that this week, today, I'm going to talk about the Resistance and the Second Law, and then next week I'm going to talk about drones and simulation theory. So let's start with the Resistance. I still have to revisit drones and simulation theory, but I would not be surprised if this ends up actually being my least favorite Muse album.
That doesn't shock me.
I tried to listen to, I actually tried to listen to this multiple times. I think I mentioned last week the fact that I couldn't get through it.
Yep.
Insufferable record, really badly produced for starters. Like the mixing is really bizarre. Sometimes it's too quiet. Sometimes it's really garish. And
Bad time.
the thing about this record is that there is so much sound on it. It's a really long album, right? It isn't even that long, but it's fucking long. And the thing is, Muse, for like a decent portion of this record, it's not even Muse. Like there's moments on here where
Not
they're just
really,
playing
no.
they're playing some Chopin, they're playing some classical music, they're doing putting some random shit in there. Matt Bellamy's speaking French at some points for no particular reason. And you would think, oh wow, you hear some Chopin. I mean, it's great. You're not hearing Muse. It's a fucking blessing. But for some reason, hearing Chopin show up at the end of a Muse song, a very, very famous piece of his, is only aggravating and really not at all that enjoyable. It's a record that's full of mystifying decisions. I mean, first of all, you don't really need to listen beyond the first 3 songs, for starters, because that's really all that the record has to offer, and not all of those songs are even good. They're just like all the record really is, and all that people really know of it. Uprising, of course, probably the biggest single from this album.
That's how I found out about Muse. It was used in the trailer for the Tom Cruise vehicle Night and Day that no one has thought about in 10 years.
Yeah. So Uprising is not a song. It is a fucking monotonous Depeche Mode ripoff. Actually, specifically, it's a Goldfrapp ripoff, who, of course, was let me be even more specific and make reference points that probably no one other than me will get. This song is specifically a ripoff of the Australian band The Presets' song My People, which has a similar sort of, guttural bass synth groove, very much in the tradition of Depeche Mode via Goldfrapp circa 2005, who in a large part popularized this particular variant of techno electro disco stuff in the 2000s that I'm very nostalgic for. So Uprising is already taking from a tradition of music that means a lot to me, and it is just doing nothing with it. This is a song that starts nowhere and goes nowhere. It is a song that never starts, actually. There's probably a better way to put it. It takes that single iterating, distorted bass groove synth idea and does nothing with it. And Matt Bellamy just kind of whinging and whining about fucking opening your third eye or whatever. It's very stupid, it's very dumb, and it's not a song. And I don't care if you like it. The title track is a little better. It at least has music in it. Like, it's tangible. It has a memorable hook. Could be wrong, could be wrong. I actually kind of don't mind it. It's all right. The third track, which is... Someone help me out here. What's it called? I can't even remember.
Oh,
Desired
God,
Constellation. Undisclosed Desires. That's it.
Yeah, that's the one.
That's probably the best song here. It is because it has a kind of like a sense of dynamics to it. Like there's it has a kind of sense of musicality and dynamics to it in a different original way. It feels like a kind of continuation of the sort of bouncier and more bright tones of Black Holes and Revelations, which I said last week is my favorite Muse album. And then the record just completely stops being a thing after that. United States of Eurasia the Exogenesis trilogy, Unnatural Selection, which is, to be clear, the longest song of all time, a song that never starts and definitely never ends. I mean, my God, what a fucking joke. I mean,
but Ryley, they want the truth. They want the truth.
It's like
They
Matt
can-
Bellamy's here.
Do you get it?
yes. And this brings me to
Conspiracies.
an aspect of Muse.
Revolution.
I think by this point in my discussion of the Muse discography, I can really
Resistance.
crystallize what Muse is and what aspects of what Muse is that I like and when it goes wrong, which it does admittedly more often than it goes right for me. But Muse are, obviously they're a big bombastic stadium rock band. They want to be Queen, they want to be U2, they want to be in that tradition. And they are a fundamentally ridiculous proposition. And they know that, right? They lean into the ridiculousness on every record. And I have no doubt that Matt Bellamy has a certain level of self-awareness about how ridiculous he sounds. The problem a lot of the time is that they try to pair that ridiculousness with an utterly contradictory sense of self-seriousness, self-righteousness, and vague gestures at meaning. And these two states exist in such conflict with each other that it creates an often unlistenable experience. Regardless of how good the music is, that conflict of identity, of Muse wanting to be ridiculous, but also kind of fundamentally failing to have an active sense of humor about their ridiculousness, really creates an utter dissonance in terms of what Muse are and what they want to be. And of course, there are moments when that doesn't happen. There are moments when they strip back the seriousness for the most part, and they really embrace having fun. And I talked about this last week. This is why Black Holes and Revelations is the best Muse album, because it's a fundamentally ridiculous record that does fundamentally ridiculous things. It owns that. It keeps the finger wagging and sloganeering to a minimum. And even when it does do that, it dresses it up in songs that are lively and full of color and interesting ideas and just a great sense of charisma and presence. So Black Holes and Revelations is what happens when that is done right, when that is done with that sense of levity. And the Resistance is what happens when it's done wrong, when it's soiled and soured and bogged down by all of this vague gesturing at meaning. And the self-awareness is still there, but it's weirdly diluted, and it's as though Muse are trying to be two distinct entities at the same time. They're trying to be this fundamentally ridiculous Queen-style band, and they're trying to be this, hard-on-sleeve U2 style band. And look, I love Queen and I love U2 within particular eras, particularly, but those are very different bands. They're both exuberant, exaggerated bands that do very silly and very campy things, but they are still very, very distinct in what they try to do and very, very distinct in what they do well. And so Muse trying to be both at the same time is a recipe for disaster. Black Holes and Revelations is one instance where I think they get the balance right. And the second law is another, because I have come around to liking this record quite a bit. And I was ready to unleash this take.
Are you smoking crack cocaine, Ryley?
No, I am. I've never had more clarity in my life. Now, let me be clear. There are exceptions. There are particularly indulgent and silly moments on this record that have that sense of fun and campiness to them, but lose it a little bit in trying to be gesturing towards profundity, specifically in the second law 2-part tracks that end the record. That's the biggest falter. And it's not just because aesthetically they're ugly as hell. It's just because I would actually enjoy them a little bit more if they just stripped away the spoken word vocals about how, we can only exert so much energy and humans are all about whatever. Enough of that. But the rest of this record, I really enjoy, and I have only enjoyed it more and more and more. And I have been so looking forward to getting to speak about this, because I feel like I've kind of started to really understand not only why, because I have enjoyed this in the past and sort of just been a little bit about I don't really know why I'm finding this so fun, but now I get it. And it is Muse are being ridiculous. They're being silly as hell. And for the most part, they're owning that. And they're not trying to pretend that it's anything other than that. Supremacy is a ridiculous attempt at trying to do a Bond theme type song. It has some of Bellamy's most disastrously funny vocals. And it also has a really kick-ass grooving riff that it absolutely sinks its teeth into, has these super over-the-top string parts that kind of come in as well. It reminds me of of watching, like Bond movies and stuff, and those really kind of ridiculous moments where it leans into the camp and niche of the character's history and the iconicness of it and stops being just another action movie. Ridiculous stuff. I enjoy it. I really find that stuff satisfying because there's no sense in which with a song like Supremacy, Muse are trying to be anything other than an absolutely balls to the wall fucking bizarro band and just like being completely camp. I'm going to say it. Madness, which I think is probably the best song here, is one of 3 songs that integrates the infamous Muse step dubstep elements. Definitely the song that does that.
Did you just say that Madness is the best?
Yes, I did. Definitely a song that does this the most tastefully of the 3 songs, I mean, by far, on this record, because it keeps it to a kind of bedrock sort of style as opposed to being this chief focus of the song. But this is a beautifully constructed track. It builds slowly and tastefully for the most part as well, ends in a really kind of full-on, full-throated falsetto moment as well, has some of the best melodies that Muse have designed in the fucking 6 years leading up to this. Really satisfying song. And I think those 2 are really the peaks of the record, in tandem with a deep cut that I really love as well, that I never hear anyone talking about, which is the song Big Freeze, which is another moment on the record where I feel like they really own how kind of just over the top and emotional they can be when they really focus in on that. And I'm going to, next week when I talk about drones, it's going to be like night and day, because that record is every bit the opposite of what this record is. But there are songs on this record that I've come to really enjoy, because especially in the context of doing this discography and appreciating when Muse work for me and when they don't work for me, there has never been, ever in the Muse discography before this or since this, such a bold-faced commitment to ridiculousness as there are in songs like Panic Station, Survival, and Follow Me, which are songs I can't say in all good conscience are good, but I can say full-throatedly that I enjoy, particularly Survival, which is maybe the most over-the-top fucking garish and insane. And this is the thing, like with Muse, and I say this about a lot of bands that try to be ridiculous and all that sort of thing. If you're going to do it, commit, go full throttle. And Muse has always kind of like half done that and then tried to kind of claw back credibility by attaching some kind of like vague concession to musical taste, right? They've always tried to do, and that's hampered their music, because as soon as I try to get into it, they're then trying to convince me, oh no, we're actually good TM in, all of the critical senses and stuff. The Second Law is the one album where Muse don't ever try to do that, more or less. They just completely let themselves go hog fucking wild. And Survival, Follow Me, which is really garish dubstep song. I kind of hate it, but I also admire it for the reasons that I've stated. I have no compulsion to skip these songs when I've been listening to this record. It has some good deep cuts as well. I've already mentioned Big Freeze, which I think is one of the best Muse songs, full stop. Animals, I think, is an underrated song as well. Explorers, I could definitely do without. I think that song is a little bit redundant and definitely goes on for too long. Like I said, this is far from a flawless record, even in terms of what it wants to achieve. It absolutely has a ceiling. Save Me, I think, is another really underrated deep cut. This was like listening to this with the kind of clean picked guitars and the real sort of shoegazy atmosphere. It made me think of like, this is like the quiet song on the Deaf Heaven album. It's like the the near on Ordinary Corrupt Human Love type beat. Like it's really pretty and it has that same sort of thing that it is borrowing from, although of course it came before Deaf Heaven were even really a thing, which makes it all the more satisfying, I suppose. And yeah, and then it does end on with a limp note, unfortunately. Liquid State doesn't really do much for me. Isolated System, the closer, is just not a song. It doesn't really start. And Unsustainable is unquestionably the worst piece of music this band have ever produced, like without a doubt. And I look, and even I can't get past how fundamentally ear scraping this is to even enjoy it on the same level as I enjoy something like Follow Me. It would be a little bit easier if the cloying spoken word vocals that I mentioned before weren't there, but still, you know, it's the kind of thing that definitely befits a record like this, but it's just not executed with the same sense of humor that the rest of the record is. And yeah, so it's not my favorite Muse record. That is still Black Holes and Revelations. It has its moments where it doesn't quite fully grasp, or it does kind of skirt away from fully committing to what it wants to do. Again, Muse's worst tendencies, they shoot themselves in the foot by trying to pretend at any point in time that they can be a serious band. Guys, you'll never be a serious band. You're never going to be fucking Radiohead, and you don't want to be. So stop trying to be. Keep making records that are totally camp, that are totally ridiculous, that totally own what they are. And don't make shit like The Resistance. Don't make shit like Drones, where you think you can actually actuate some kind of change and end up only really appealing to 4chan Reddit boarders. I'll also say as well, just to kind of add a cherry on top of the shit cake that I'm delivering to Jake and Morgan right now, that I do think this is probably, with the exception, the very notable exception of the more egregious dubstep moments, this is probably the best produced Muse album. Like, this is the
Shut
one.
up. God, what have I done? Oh, Jesus.
I mean, seriously, I wouldn't say it's better produced than Black Holes and Revelations necessarily. And certainly with their earlier records, it's kind of weird to compare production because they're just at that point going for such a different thing. But, you know, for the most part, this record sounds really, really clean. It has a lot of muscle to it. The songs sound really bright and they have that sense of maximalism that you would, of course, want from a record like this, but they're never overly compressed or made to sound like particularly brittle. It's a record that, I mean, I guess maybe with the exception of Explorers, again, I don't really care for that song. But yeah, on the whole, I'm pretty positive on this record. I enjoyed it a great deal. It's one of the only, it is the only time in this Muse deep dive where I have listened to a record more than twice, specifically to prepare for this segment. So, shoot me. The Second Law, or more like the second best Muse album.
Oh, better than fuck off. Oh my God. I don't even like Muse this much. Jesus Christ.
Saying that the Second Law is better than Absolution or Origin of Symmetry is the single worst take to ever be shared on this podcast.
Look, I like it more. I'll say that. I don't know if it's better.
That's not better. That's not better.
To quote you in our quiz video, well, good. You can fall asleep at night knowing that.
Hey, I don't get to. I feel like I haven't gotten to have a moment like this in a while, so I'm really, really treasuring it.
No, I'm happy.
A moment where I think I have to have you committed.
I feel like if I had to do this a year ago, I would have just been a little bit too self-conscious to fully just own how I feel. I would be giving more and more
prostrate yourself like this.
Yeah, but no, I've never felt more virile than I have right now, talking about how much I like Muse's The Second Law. An album, it should be said that I've given 3 stars, so, it's not like I'm saying it's a masterpiece, but it is a very, very silly record that I have a very, very fun time listening to.
Chad move, Riley. We should get together and eat raw meat or something. I don't know what these masculine types do.
Let's never speak of this again.
All right. Let's move into our first review of the day, which is, of course, the new album from Danger Mouse and Black Thought, Cheat Codes. Unofficial theme of this week's episode is collaborations. We're talking about two albums where essentially it's a meeting of the minds between two distinct figures, one who's typically known for working in front of the microphone, sort of producing and singing or performing vocally, and the other of whom is typically known for their work behind the boards. And it is both of these records that we're reviewing are interesting syntheses of both artists' strengths, and definitely I think earn the mantle of, this being a collaborative record by name, as opposed to this just being like a Black Thought album or a Danger Mouse album. You get the full effect of both of these performers on this record. First of all, Black Thought, because this is the artist that I have more feelings on than Danger Mouse, who frankly, to be honest, I kind of ambivalent towards.
Deeply inconsistent producer.
I don't think I've ever really liked Danger Mouse all that much. I think Danger Mouse hip hop stuff is definitely where his strengths lie, as opposed to like producing really cruddy, lame blues rock for bands like the Black Keys, where I could just give a less of a shit if it existed at all. But I will say, Danger Mouse does really pull it out of the bag for this record. Great beats, great sounds, great production, and really setting the stage for this collaboration with Black Thought. And I say collaboration in a certain sense because like with Mad Villainy, for instance, it's not just like this guy does the rapping, this guy does the sounds. It is like a synthesis of their artistic personalities in a lot of different ways. Black Thought defines the perspectives of this record. He's obviously rapping his ass off, as you would expect. And it's particularly meaningful and exciting for this record to exist because in terms of solo material, we have some great efforts from Black Thought, particularly the Streams of Thought series, the early Streams of Thought EPs, and then Volume 3, which was released as an album. All great releases. Volume 3 in particular is really, really underappreciated. But ever since the Roots kind of just unofficially dissolved or just settled into this elder statesman period of being Jimmy Fallon's band.
The Jimmy Fallon.
Like, of all of the talk shows you could have ended up on, Fallon
the
really?
Least cool one, the coolest band attached to the least cool man.
Jimmy Fallon is like one of the few people I think I would like. I'm not even saying this jokingly. I think I would genuinely find it funny to watch being tortured. I'm not even like as a joke. I mean, because obviously it would be fucking traumatic to watch someone be tortured, really. But I think it would be funny if it were Jimmy Fallon. I don't think
drunk he'd be called Jimmy Fall On.
Yeah, I'm not saying I want any harm to come to Jimmy Fallon, but what I am saying is that if they were to do a real life reenactment of the electrocution scene in Lethal Weapon with Jimmy Fallon playing the Mel Gibson role, and it just getting shocked and not escaping because Jimmy Fallon has no muscle mass, I would watch that. And I would, So the Roots have not made a record in several years, and they seem to not be on the route. They seem to not be on the path to making another one anytime soon. So in my opinion, it's about damn time, to borrow Lizzo's phrase, that we got a proper full-length release that stands on its own from Black Thought. And yes, it is a collaborative release all the same, but it is, I feel like, the most distilled and consistent and exciting expression of the talents of this, of the standout member of the Roots, a fantastic band that are, have at least 5 or 6 standout members, but one of the greatest rappers of all time, I would say. I still think that his performances on records like Illadelph Half-Life, Things Fall Apart, basically any Roots album, dizzying. And there's no exception here. As soon as the opening track's a little bit of a whiff, kind of just easing you into the record, but as soon as you get into the title track, you're getting these rhyme schemes and you're getting this complex delivery from Black Thought that is just, it's like we're home. He hasn't lost a step. You are getting there's just so much of this just, especially re-listening to this, getting to actually process it, because he's just throwing so much at you the whole time. Like, theologians point to the trap house that God is in, go on, take his name in vain, like a phlebotomist. Like, my man, no one else is going to rhyme God is in with phlebotomist. Like 0.0001% of people even know what a phlebotomist is. Like, I had to Google it.
No one's gonna do that because they can't.
Nope.
He's the only man who can.
Obviously, like, the content of what Black is rapping about is all like, it's really, really invigorating and exciting and cool and stuff. And a lot of it is sort of about, you know, his presence in the world of hip hop, and his presence in the current climate and all that sort of thing, and personal stuff. But I would say that, without denigrating any of his amazing penmanship, Black's presence and his vocal performance and his sheer technicality is the biggest draw for me. There are lots of amazing verses and incredible bars and couplets and lines and things that stand out, reference points and stuff. Who got the streets of Philly flooded like Puerto Rico's? You get McNabb like Donovan, it's finitos. Like, there's so much funny shit on this album. It's just, the better head for the church, mosque, or synagogue. Chase the grim reefer with genocide. We need it like a hole in the head, thorn in his side. It all takes its toll in the end. Strong fellas die, made figures who name bring become king, or became fathers and sons facing the same thing. In the hood, mouthful of blood, tasting the same sting, playing a game, trying hard to hang by the same string. You better get the cheat code or get recode, fella. Bad critic, get your shit repoed. Listen, like, the rhyme schemes on this record, it's funny because we got Doom on this record as well. An amazing, amazing feature from the Vault on the song Belize. Incredible, incredible verse. And it's like, you realize how much they've kind of taken from each other in terms of the complexity of their rhyme schemes, and the way that they will both be able to hang on a particular rhyme or a particular sound that ends each line, and they'll be able to use it and kind of abuse it for like 15, 16 bars in a row, essentially. Introduce a new rhyme scheme or a new motif, and then kind of double back to the old one, and create this kind of sense of lyrical forward motion, essentially, that is so dizzying to listen to. But of course, both Black Thought and Doom, and basically every guest rapper on this record, have such distinct presences and identities that it's always really, really easy to distinguish them, and always really, really easy to follow along with what they're saying, even if it takes you a while to catch up to all of the allegories, you know, metaphors and bits of wordplay that are happening on this thing. But anyway, Jake, Morgan, what do you guys think of this record? How does it hold up to your expectations? And what are your thoughts overall?
I've been meaning to get into the Roots for quite some time now. I just felt like I needed an in, because their two most acclaimed records are both like 70 or 80 minutes long, and I just haven't carved out the time yet. So this 38, 39-minute album featuring their MC at the forefront felt like the perfect opportunity to finally do that. And my God, it's good. I mean, it's like Ryley said, there's just so much being thrown at you that it's almost hard to process. And I certainly haven't processed all of it yet. But what I have processed is the sound of this record, which is immaculate top to bottom. I don't really have a take on Danger Mouse as a producer. I'm not all that familiar, or maybe I am and just don't know it. But regardless, he's doing pretty incredible work here. This is very much my type of hip hop. It's very heavily indebted to the 90s, which, you know, obviously you have one of the titans of that era on the microphone, so that tracks. But it also does feel still like it is looking backwards in that sense, but in a way that I find really invigorating somehow, which I think is honestly kind of a hat trick if you think about it, to be able to look backwards in that sense and still feel so emboldened and enlivened by something.
Yeah, this is a no frills, like, it's definitely geared more towards, like, there's some more modern names on here, but this is a project for like old heads to appreciate. And I don't say that as like a pejorative or anything. It's just like, this is as classic feels. And I feel like Danger Mouse kind of embraces that with his production, that like, this is probably my favorite work from him, just because I've heard stuff in the past, but like, Mouse in the Mask, not my favorite Doom project.
No,
I'm not
me
like
neither.
some of his, he's like, he did a good job with that like one Parquet Chords album that he produced, but like generally speaking, he's just not like, and even here, he kind of just embraces Madlib. Like this album, if you told me it was produced by Madlib, I would believe you. It's that same kind of grimier, crate digging sensibility to these beats that are a lot like, they're very textural, they're very bass heavy, they're very sampled very well, just sounds great. And I think that there is some issues with maybe the vocal mixing on like some tracks here. Identical Deaths, for instance, is one of the songs where I feel like thought is sort of like diminished as a presence because of the sound that's going on here, but that doesn't really happen all that often. And just to speak to one element of this album, it's like, if you're going to get a Black Thought solo album, the best part about it is going to be him. He shows up, he's the highlight of any feature he's on. One of my favorite features of like the last 10 years was him showing up on the Freddie Gibbs mixtape, Shadow of a Doubt, where he and Freddie fucking rapped over a Jay Dilla beat, and it was sick as fuck. But he comes here, he's delivering funny, careful, thoughtful bars, a lot of them about, very contemporary feeling. But one of the cool things about them is that it really does feel like Black Thought's embracing his status as an elder statesman. He's talking to a lot of younger rappers on here. He's, kind of putting them in their places a little bit, but also inviting some of the new guard who obviously like he sees a kinship with, like Joey Badass, for example. And then there's, like just the way he delivers lines, like blackness is not a monolith. It's just like, man makes everything hit so hard. There's not a moment on here where he's not fully on. And that actually kind of goes for the guests too, which is like one of the most insane like bouts of chemistry going on here. I mean, you got Raekwon on the darkest part, who does a great job. I'm not familiar with Kid Sister, but fucking, I mean, this track is just exceptional. This is where I think the album really starts to hit its stride. And hell, fucking Because Joey Badass does a great job, but
yeah,
I was mostly surprised by the fact that Russ is the other guy on here and he doesn't suck. Like
it's a decent verse from Russ.
Yeah,
it does end with that one line where he's like, fuck, what does he say? It's kind of corny, where he's like, I don't vacation, dog, I guilt trip. Where I'm like, yeah,
all right,
sure, Russ.
He needs
but
a
it's
bit more
fine.
confidence to be able to deliver that. He's not quite on the same level as someone
Also,
like Black Thought. Or
the line where he's like, my skin gets red too easy. She don't want to change her name like Washington. Like Washington Redskins.
2 Chains on RTJ4-esque.
a little bit, where he's definitely better than he's ever been before, but he's still a noticeable step down. But he doesn't like detract from the song, in my opinion.
He's fine. He's good.
He's energized on here. No, absolutely. But I mean, like, when you compare him against the other features, I mean, like, the MF Doom feature on Belize is notable because A, it's a great feature. B, I also just like, if this is a leftover from Danger Doom, I wouldn't actually be surprised all that much, just because they're like, I believe there is actually a reference to an Adult Swim show here, but it's still Doom sounding like Doom in his, Imperial era. I don't know if that means it was from there or if it just sounded like it was, or he just kind of had this laying around. It's a great deployment of that particular verse. I think that like he shows up and it sort of gives you like everything when it comes to Doom's appeal, and that like his rhymes are really like wiry and very literate, but also he's just very funny on this song, which is a bit of an underappreciated aspect of the record, is that it's a lot of the people on here are just very funny. But this is just one of those records that I wish I loved it more, because I can't really verbalize as to why I don't. It's like great in most respects. It's missing like a a certain extra spice, maybe, but I still can't complain with what's here, especially when you have something like Aquamarine featuring Michael Kiwanuka, which
That's
is
the
one of my
best song
favorite
on
songs
here.
on here.
I-
It's
I-
fucking bars. I am an avowed fan of Michael Kiwanuka's music, and him showing up on here was a really nice surprise for me. And I also think that like you have that and Belize right back to next to each other, which is great. And
Yeah.
Identical Deaths isn't quite my favorite thing on here. It's a bit scant, and it's a bit less substantial than everything else. But after that, you get Strangers, which has, I mean, Run the Jewels is on here. Both LP and Killer Mike absolutely fucking destroy their respective verses. The Ronald Reagan line from Michael is fucking
It's
Michael.
just the most
From Mike.
Run the Jewels bar of all time.
And
like
same with LP. And ASAP Rocky is here and holds his own on a track with Black Thought and Run the Jewels. And it's like, I'm not an ASAP Rocky hater or anything, but it's just like, he's clearly not in the same fucking avenue of skill as these guys, and he's still really good on here. And there's also Conway the Machine on the penultimate track, Saltwater, which, if anything has ever incentivized me to listen to more of his music, this is it. He's terrific here. It really feels like he kind of has Black Thought sort of shares a lot of sensibilities with the like Griselda people, and I feel like them, like their sort of chemistry is fantastic. It's just an album that it's not an underwhelming project. It's just not one that like, it's not like gonna stay with me like Ethiops or something is, but I can easily see why that wouldn't be the case for a lot of other people.
Yeah, I mean, I think I feel about the same as you, Jake, to be honest. It's a really fun record. I really, really enjoy it. It definitely has
Very
these
well
moments-
paced too.
It has these moments that really, really tower over the rest of it. The darkest part, Belize and Aquamarine in particular, which is my favorite song, as I've said. But, you know, there are other great songs on here. The title track is great. No Gold Teeth is great as well. Especially love the beat on that song. Really, really. And that's the thing, like Danger Mouse really, really excels here because he has, what I mean by you feel the personality of both artists is that there's a lot of beats on here that are just in and of themselves quite memorable and really, really catchy. And there's also just moments on this record where you get like straight up really, really good hooks as well. And songs that don't necessarily need to have hooks at all. But you get that extra level that's given to you. Like particularly the best hook is absolutely the one on The Darkest Part, which is from the Kid Sisters hook as well. It adds this extra flavor to it that I really, really like. It makes it catchy. It makes it into a fulsome song as opposed to just a hip hop track or just a rap track. Like you could conceivably imagine a song like that getting radio play. I also really love Dylan Cartledge's hook on Because as well. Like that's so catchy. The way he sings, he really makes a meal out of it. And each time that hook comes back in, I'm like, yes, I love this shit. It's really satisfying. So yeah, that song and Darkest Part, I could easily imagine being on the radio. And Aquamarine as well. Like, this is great because Danger Mouse actually produced Kiwanuka's album from 2019. And that was a great record. And so it's cool to see this team up again. His amazing voice. I don't need, no one needs me to tell them that. Amazingly well suited, but also like, I think this is the standout on the record as well, because again, while the rapping throughout this record has been amazing, the subject matter has been, you know, fun, funky, not super serious, cool. It just feels like Black, I don't know, taps into something else in his verses here. And there's just like a level of breadth of scope in the things that he touches on, and his wordplay, his cadences, his rhyme schemes as well, that just feels like you're getting some of the most definitive verses of this later stage of his career. We go from Lyra to Libra, from Cold Water to Fever, to World War III, from the treaty signed in Geneva. The biology teacher said we used to be amoebas. The neighborhood preacher said we emerged from the ether. We converged from urethra and struck gold Eureka. The morning star Tariq, I was born to be a teacher. With a scorpion or the frog, the nature of the creature is to evolve, though it's the savage beast we truly are. Like, when he comes in with the start of that, you feel like you're hearing like some biblical hip hop. Like you feel like you're getting like some origin story told to you. Essentially, it feels like an all-timer verse from the first few lines, and you just sit up and bolt up to attention. my name in the Quran, like the kingdom of Suleiman. You done lost your mind
Yeah.
trying to call me a Mulinyan. Because in 215, where folks fight depression and wise pack protection, lives lack direction. I'm a king, I'm dipped in God's black complexion. Survival of the fittest is natural selection. Now bear down on the scene like I'm Saladin. The stone courage esteem is aquamarine. You mask how you really feel like it's Halloween, where they ask how you really feel about my machine in a class that I'm only in, alien horsepower like a Mongolian. I mean, shit, dude. He just keeps going. And then Kiwanuka comes in between each and you're like, fuck, I can't take much more of this. Like one verse is enough. And then he comes in with the second verse. I've been through hoodies and sneakers to beepers and record features, hustling nicks of reefer to tuss them with the reaper, sensory deprivation to ultimate synesthesia, freeing our brother's keeper from the teeth of another creature, breaking and entering into the theater, the search and seizure is the work of genius, somewhere between Earth and Venus. At our convenience, even non-believers make prayers, haters and naysayers is buried in cake layers. I take day as a blessing and see the night as a lesson. Fuck, I could keep going. It's so good. Shit. I mean, this is why he is number fucking one in the game, basically. I mean, I have to think for a moment if there is a penman working today that I like more than Black Thought, or that I find more just completely gobsmackingly talented and
I mean, now that
visionary and
Doom is
stomach.
out of the picture, there's not a lot of competition.
Yeah, and like that, so that to me is like the moment, one of the definitive songs of Thought's career, like within the roots or outside of it. Amazing, amazing, amazing. And another great song we haven't shouted out, Saltwater, the second last song here.
Yes.
Great feature from Conway. And again, I've said every time that he or Griselda have come up this year, it's been a great year for him. His album is one of the best hip hop records of the year. It's a treat to hear him show up on here. He has a really, really great verse, super kind of like paranoid almost, but like sort of eerie, and you get a real sense of danger and the fact that, you know, Conway is living on the edge to a certain extent and has a certain uncertain future. I mean, he's great at channeling that sense of tension that comes through in the way that he raps. And yeah, it's just a real treat of an album. It completely delivers on all fronts. Yeah, there are moments that I don't quite, that don't quite connect with me as much, like Sometimes and Identical Deaths and Close to Famous, and the closing track as well, I think is fine, but I could really sort of take or leave it compared to some of the other ones. Again, great verse, lots of awesome name drops and reference points that come into play there. It's a really solid, fundamentally awesome record. I still don't find Danger Mouse to be like an utterly amazing producer. I feel very much like he is giving some of his best work here, but it is certainly there's nothing here that really kind of reinvents the wheel or matches the kind of dizzying heights of what Black is doing. Like, for instance, the song Belize, great song. I almost wish it didn't have a beat that was so kind of like cruisy and sort of moody. I wish it kind of had something with a little bit more edge to it, a little bit more pulse maybe.
Black Thought just needs to work with like more producers, just because like I feel like there's no shortage of them working today that would make an album that would be like a genuine certifiable diamond classic if the combo was right enough.
Yeah. I will say though, Belize is the song that has the line. I mean, it's so easy to focus on Doom's verse, which is amazing, but this is actually another one of my favorite Black verses on the album as well. He has that line about where he's like, fuck a thick skin, I got me an exoskeleton, the black Colin Farrell and the lobster.
Oh, I love that fucking bar. It's so great.
It's like he's making an exoskeleton lobster wordplay thing there. I don't really get where Colin Farrell and the lobster like comes in there. I don't quite like.
I just appreciate the fact, like, just imagining Black Thought sitting down to watch The Lobster is so fucking hilarious as an image in my head.
Yeah, it's just fucking what a just dope ass, funny, super silly thing. Like, yeah, really good record. Really, really enjoyed it. I can see why people are kind of going hog wild for this. It is like such an irresistible proposition, and it is, I think it will be one of the year's friendliest, most approachable hip hop records that will be really easy for a lot of people to get on board with. And that's awesome. And that's great. And I hope that people use it as a chance to springboard to other records from artists involved in here. Like listen to Joey Badass's new album, listen to Conway's new album. keep using this to explore and crate dig and further your tastes. It's hard for me to say, like, this is a good entry point into a lot of these artists as opposed to like a substantive project, because it sounds kind of condescending. I don't mean it to, but it's not a record that I think I'll come back to a huge amount. Certain songs, yes, but it is just like an exciting collaboration that I'm glad exists and will undeniably
You just get
pave
to
the
hear
way.
Black Thought rap. That's a fucking privilege.
Yeah. Absolutely. We're lucky to get that. Okay, favorite tracks and ratings then for cheat codes. Jake, why don't you go first?
3 favorite tracks got to be Strangers, Aquamarine, and Belize. Least favorite track, yeah, it's like either Identical Deaths or Sometimes. Both good in their respective positions, just by virtue of the fact that they're just surrounded by better material. And I give the album a hearty 7.5.
3 favorites: Belize, Strangers, and The Darkest Part. I don't really have any least favorites. Probably Identical Deaths, but I do enjoy that one as well. And I will give this a 9 out of 10.
My favorite tracks are Aquamarine, The Darkest Part, and I will say Saltwater. Least favorite track is Identical Deaths, and the record gets a 7.5 from me as well, which means that overall we have an average of 8.0 for Danger Mouse and Black Thought's cheat codes. All right, let's move on to our second review of the day, which is the new collaborative record from Panda Bear and Sonic Boom, Reset. Now, Panda Bear is one of the key members of the legendary 2000s psychedelic pop group, let's just say that. Animal Collective, a band that we have talked about fairly extensively on this channel. Myself and Zach reviewed their entire discography back in December of last year. That was a mammoth 5-hour video that we're incredibly proud of. We did touch on some of Panda Bear's solo material in that video, which is solo material that I am intimately familiar with. But this, I think, is definitely an exciting new release that deserves its own spotlight on the show. So I'm glad that we're able to do that, because I think, I'll say this straight off the bat, this is the best Panda Bear solo album since 2007's Person Pitch, which will probably never be outclassed for me. That's just such a fundamental childhood favorite of mine. But it does represent, as with the Danger Mouse and Black Thought record we talked about, because those are 2 artists that had collaborated before, and we're kind of bringing that collaboration to the forefront in terms of how the record was named and credited. And that's a similar case here with Panda Bear and Sonic Boom. So for those who don't know, Sonic Boom is one Mr. Pete Kember, founding member of the legendary shoegaze noise duo Spacemen 3, alongside Jason Pierce, who of course would go on to be the frontman of Spiritualized. For those who don't know, Spacemen 3, as I said, legendary shoegaze noise rock band, heavily influenced by blues music and early kind of 50s, 60s pop music. Their famous kind of treatise, which I think they named a release after, taking drugs to make music to take drugs to.
Yes.
That's what Spacemen 3 sound like. Released 2 iconic records in the late 80s, early 90s, The Perfect Prescription, Playing with Fire, both staples of my childhood, and before I even, had imbibed on any substances whatsoever. And so the sensibilities of Kember in particular are really attuned to the sort of sensibilities of Panda Bear, Noah Lennox, who I think has always pursued and been interested in these kinds of heavily sampled weaving tapestries of sort of intense but very beautiful sound. In the liner notes to Person Pitch in 2007, Kember is credited as a huge inspiration on Panda Bear in terms of as a reference point. And that credit was the genesis of Kember actually reaching out to Panda Bear to say, hey, I really dig what you're doing, appreciate the shout out, we should work together. And then Kember produced the follow-up to Person Pitch 2011's Tomboy, as well as the record that followed that as well, the excellent 2015 album Panda Bear Meets the Grim Reaper. Both of those records were really a collaboration on the same level as this one, except that Kimber Sonic Boom wasn't credited in the artist title. And this, I guess, represents the fullest fruition of their collaborations to the extent that it really is representing the vision of both artists. It's interesting to note that the last Panda Bear solo record, 2019's Buoys, was not produced with Kimber and was, in my estimation, and I believe the estimation of many others, quite a letdown of a record. There's definitely elements of that record I enjoy, but it is very sleepy, very minimal, very slow, not a lot going on there. It doesn't really give me much of the fulsome sound that I like to get from Panda Bear. And so I guess maybe it says something about the strength of the collaborations with Kimber, that he's back here and you're getting some of the most satisfying and fulsome material in years from either artist. Yeah, this is a record that really snuck up on me. I'll say that off the bat. As a avowed Panda Bear fan, I had a really good idea of what this was probably going to sound like going into it, but I was still taken aback, first of all, by how heavily the influence of that sunshine pop is felt here. It's really like leaning into that, because Panda's always been compared to Brian Wilson, just because, for starters, he has a very Brian Wilson-esque voice when he really leans into it.
Oh, yeah.
And, borrows a lot from Beach Boys era 60s, and even earlier than that, 50s pop, even a bit of doo-wop and stuff come into the realm. But never have they been so pronounced as they are here. Like the thing about Person Pitch, which is the other record of Panda's that I think most clearly evokes those influences, is that the thing about that record is that basically all the music on that record is samples. It's entirely constructed of samples that are kind of built around and mixed together and turned into this amorphous blob of beautiful music, essentially. But a lot of what Panda's done since then has moved away from the sample focus. Like Tomboy, a record which I don't really get on with all that much, completely jettisons a lot of the sample-based stuff. And then Panda Bear versus the Grim Reaper, which is a really colorful and really fun pop record that I highly recommend, is more focused on original instrumentation. Whereas here, you get a good mixture of original instrumentation and very recognizable and strongly anchoring samples. And it creates a particular landscape that feels like the meeting point of a record like Person Pitch and a record like Tomboy or Grim Reaper, where the best strengths of both of those sort of visions of Panda sound are synthesized to make something that feels fresh, invigorating, and vibrant, and is really given a lot of muscular heft by how good of a sound designer Pete Kimber is. So this is a record that really snuck up on me, first of all, for the strength of those influences and how boldly they're coming through here, more boldly than ever before, I would say, but also how satisfying this is as a holistic album listen. First time I heard it, it was like, yeah, this is very pleasant and very, very enjoyable. And there's some beautiful soundscapes here, but I've listened to it 4 times now. And each time I find myself getting lost in it more and more, and just so captivated by the soundscapes that Kimber and Lennox conjure. And I find myself more and more satisfied with this as an album the more time I spend with it. I do think it gets off to a little bit of a slow start. It's not really until
I agree.
It's not really until the 3rd track that I start to sort of get really immersed in the soundscapes. I think particularly because the first 2 are just a little bit more brittle and minimal. I like those first 2 songs, don't get me wrong. But it's once the record really sets into a vibe that has a little bit more going on in the mixes, a little bit more kind of like treble, I suppose, and even like a little bit more pronounced treble and bass with 3rd track, and then particularly the 4th track, Edge of the Edge, which is I think the best song in the album. The record really finds a groove. And then it hits a run of songs from In My Body onwards, where it really zones into this particular hypnotic singular mode where you're just getting a really basic musical motif for 5 minutes plus, but their sound design and the way that the tracks kind of fill out and atmospherically kind of elaborate on themselves means that it never starts to feel rote or overly repetitive. And I just completely sink into it in a way that I haven't really been able to do with music of Panda Bears for a long time. So it's a record that really rewards that, I think. It's a record that I have no doubt would benefit from, again, being complemented by the use of substances. That's true of all music that Panda and Kemba make. And I don't think that's inherently a weakness of the record. I think it's a strength, really, if anything, and how well it can complement certain, psychedelic experiences, or even conjure them if you're sober. But yeah, it's a really pretty, beautiful, and soulful album that has a lot of genuinely warm positivity and life-affirming feeling in it that, it makes it a unique record this year, and it makes it a really refreshing album too. Jake, what are your thoughts on this record as someone who's a little bit more new to each of these artists?
Well, because of you and Zach doing the Animal Collective video, which I highly enjoyed, proceeded to get into Animal Collective and kind of use that as a bit of a guide in the following months. And I've become a really big fan since. Like Feels, for example, is just one of my favorite albums in general. And I've listened to a lot of the solo stuff. Person Pitch is like easily one of my favorite Animal Collective projects. And I really admire how beautifully an album like that is produced. And I can't say that any other Panda Bear projects immediately grabbed me enough to really sink my teeth into after that one. But this is not really the case. It's something that's really easy to relay the appeal of, aside from Animal Collective, which is a really eclectic, really strange band that I feel like could be very off-putting if you start in the wrong place, especially depending on what kind of music fan you are. Whereas this is, again, that sort of leaning into the Brian Wilson influences, that it's like this, you could very well just say this is the best Beach Boys album since insert whenever the last time the Beach Boys made a good album was. And while that does lead to a derivative kind of sound, it's a sound that the two of them accomplish so confidently. I'm like Ryley, I do like the first two songs. I would say that Every Day, I love the way that sounds, but I don't really like the little repeated vocal hook of something to tell you, might even yell you. Like it's a bit repetitive for my liking, even though I really like the sound. So when you switch over into Edge of the Edge, which is my favorite song here, that's when this album really just fucking starts to hit. There's something about the way the vocals are mixed on here that is very much like the Beach Boys albums, and that it sounds like they're mic'd very distantly, in that it sort of sounds like you're hearing these, the vocals existing within like a very specific space, and it sort of adds this huge dynamism to all of the sound here, which I think is definitely felt because of Sonic Boom's contributions. It just kind of marries the most accessible parts of what Panda and Sonic Boom are interested in, and it does so seamlessly. Like, this is just a really bright, colorful pop album that's really got no huge flaws for me, even though I wouldn't say I'm like overwhelmingly taken with it. But I love the sound of stuff like the synths on Edge of the Edge, like right in between the first like verses. Like, it has that instrumental passage, which are just these gorgeous kind of like older but still kind of chintzy sounding synths, and Panda's literally just like in full. It's not even really Beach Boys, I guess, that this reminds me of. It really reminds me of the Smile Sessions. It really reminds me of that sort of Baroque, sunshiny, like adorned. It sounds like it wouldn't be out of place coming from the slightly more adventurous and even more like art rock inflected stuff that Brian Wilson would do a lot later. And it makes this just a really, really captivating listen from front to back. But boy, that fucking like the first third is good, but the final 2/3, I am just with this like the whole time, especially Edge of the Edge, In My Body, and Whirlpool. In My Body being like a really like lyrically very AV focused, like this wouldn't be out of place on something like Feels, I think. And especially like Whirlpool is just this fucking beautifully hypnotic piece of music, like a deeply underrated song. This should be like one of the seen as one of the more album standouts for me. It's just this sort of center here is just it's some of the richest music that Panda's name has been on, and I can't get enough of it. I definitely feel more of Panda's influence on here. I don't know, like, if we're meant to take the collaboration angle as more of like a split 50-50 kind of deal, but I definitely feel like this is more of a, a Panda project that Sonic Boom produced. Not to undersell his contributions here, because I do think they are pretty vital, just because this sounds so fucking great. But it definitely feels like a project that if you removed one of them from it, you're going to be missing a lot more if you remove Panda than if you remove Boom. That's not really a criticism. It's just kind of the inherent nature of the album.
I would say the way to think about it, and again, some fans might find this reductive, whatever, is like this record without Sonic Boom is just person pitch, basically. Like the difference between those two records is the addition of Sonic Boom. The additional weight and heft and kind of depth to the mixes that this album has is him. And again, I don't say that to denigrate person pitch, a record I love. It's just that there is this difference in production style and a just general greater presence of warmth and variation, I guess, in the tones and textures that I think Sonic brings. Especially, I think, in that second half, like Edge of the Edge is an amazing song, but when you get into that run of In My Body, Whirlpool, and Danger, these are just three successive songs that are just pure, and again, I hate to use this word, but it's pure, like, vibey music. It's music you kind of just fall into. In My Body, I think, is my favorite of those three in particular. It just kind of is one of the most glacial and sparse things here, and has, I think, the best vocal performance from Panda, just really tender and pretty, and just he's not afraid to just be a little bit vulnerable vocally here, and it's really, really pretty. And then it's like, after this stretch of beautiful songs, the record kind of has this ELO-esque banger with Living in the After, where it kind of just roars back to life and gives you something that has so much more happening in it. And then finishes really, really strong with Everything's Been Leading to This as well, which is a nice way to carry the album out on a high note in terms of like pulse and stuff. So yeah, I think there's a real arc to the record. I have even come to the point where I really value those earlier moments where it's kind of like just sort of coming to life a little bit. Like Go On is, I think, probably the slowest paced thing here, but I have come to really like the feel of it and the space that it puts you in. Every time I listen to this record, I gain a new level of appreciation for it. It's rocketing its way up my list of favorite albums of the year. It is not, there's not a lot to it. It's not a record that's going to give you like this rich tapestry of things you've never heard before, but it's an immensely comforting album. It's an immensely warm and sunshiny record, and it makes me feel kind of wholesome and sort of nice in a way that few records have recently. And that's not a fault of any of those records. It's just like, it's nice to have this vibe. It's like we haven't really gotten much of it lately. So I really, really enjoy this. And I will say, it pairs super well with the Animal Collective record that was released earlier this year. Time Skiffs came out in February. Came out on a day that was so stacked with exciting new releases that we never actually got around to reviewing it. So I want to take some time now to talk about that record a little bit as well, because I know, Jake, that you were a big fan of that album too. I think for both of us, it's one of the standouts of the first half of the year in particular. And I think one of the best Animal Collective records, certainly the best one since 2013 Centipede Hurts, and maybe the most like approachable and directly sort of friendly record that they've made since 2009's Merryweather Post Pavilion. Jake, what were your thoughts when because you would have approached Time Skiffs really, really new into that Animal Collective era, because it really came on the hinge of that video that we did. What are your thoughts on that record and the strengths of that album in particular?
Well, I would certainly say this is on the upper tier for their discography for me, because a couple of things. I think it's nice that we're talking about it today a little bit, just to sort of give it some shine, just to for the sake of completeness, so we can sort of round out. If you want to know what this podcast thinks of the other Animal Collective albums, go check out our video. It's great. It's very, very in depth. And I think the cool thing about it is that you sort of chart the trajectory of the narrative of Animal Collective. And one of the more interesting things is that they were a band that is so you just wouldn't imagine their appeal being that broad if you hear like even some of the best albums. You hear like Spirit They've Gone, Spirit They've Vanished, or Feels. Those are albums that, while beautiful and like just some of my favorite records, they're full of music that isn't really like friendly, or at least constructed in a way that feels like imminently consumable. So I can certainly understand that, like, as they sort of pushed at the limits of their sound and made records that were like gnarlier and like weirder, like from like Strawberry Jam onward, they did Strawberry Jam, which is like this kind of assaultive like pop record that's just like it's really like loud and aggressive, but it's also beautiful. But it's still something that, like, if you weren't into Animal Collective before, it might not be the greatest place to start. And then they go to Centipede Hurts and they kind of push people away, and like the narrative of Animal Collective really becomes a little bit more in the background of like indie music. Like, they were big Pitchfork darlings, and then suddenly they weren't. And so you sort of see them do like albums and side projects that just get gradually less and less attention, and that sort of deviate a little bit more with like what I think people came to expect from them. And while I think that, you know, we'll absolutely go to bat for to things like Centipede Hurts as being like, yeah, it's an unfriendly album, but it's also like great. So who cares? But they push in this direction that they sort of like, they test the limits of, I think, what a lot of people sort of wanted from them, or just wanted from music in general, with albums like Painting With, where it's just, it's an album that feels very like monochrome, and it's just like, you can just sort of understand why this band came along at a time that was perfect for them to become immensely popular, and also perfect for them to sort of disappear instantly.
Well, and here's the thing. Here's my thoughts on that, which is like, first of all, indie music evolved past Animal Collective, and it wasn't really Animal Collective's fault. I don't think that
not at all.
Regardless of what they put out after Merryweather, I think that they were going to move away from the cultural limelight just because of the way that indie music was drastically changing 2011, 2012. But also, like, I think that the, I guess, commercial and critical failure of Centipede Hurts kind of freed Animal Collective in a lot of ways, both to spend more time pursuing side projects, but also to become a little bit more esoteric and exploratory of a band, to kind of go in this direction that moved away from pop music, essentially, and to just focus on these textural experiments that they now had the freedom to do, once the burden of, I guess, cultural expectation had been lifted from them, right? And so a record like Painting With, which is a record that I know Zach and I spoke about, we don't love that record. It's kind of a difficult record to get a lot out of, but it is a record that is like, it's very emblematic of what Animal Collective have been doing ever since, you know, after Centipede Hurts, which is explorations in texture and jamming, right? So really just letting sounds exist and creating these sonic environments. So that's what they did with the Meeting of the Waters EP and the Bridge to Quiet EP, is they were really kind of exploring sonic landscapes, and they were really, really fascinating and really, really unique and really, really cool. But they were never what people who got on board with albums like Strawberry Jam and Merryweather Post Pavilion wanted. And I think Animal Collective were content to not have to satiate that group. And it's really interesting that they've come back around to making music that is, I will say, more maximal in terms of the amount of instrumentation, but also more focused on melody, on bass, on conventional song structures as well. And it feels like they now have the freedom to do that, to return to that space, because they have been able to exist in the ether for so long. And because they can do this without the burden of expectation. And you get a real sense that this is a band that are exploring this more fulsome, colorful, fleshed out side of their sound, and are able to do it better now because they haven't felt this feeling of force. Like, you have to make another record that's like this, that. You have to make a record that satisfies in this, that ways. They're able to approach this new era of their sound that synthesizes things from Merryweather Post Pavilion and the stuff they've done, the more experimental avant-garde stuff they've done since then, and create and craft this new iteration of who they are that does appeal to people who got on board more with the pop-centric stuff that they're so good at making. and they're able to revisit that, or they're able to kind of reignite that with a certain carefree and sort of pressureless, just, we can do this now because we want to, we're back in the mood for this, we're feeling up to it, and this is what we want to do, and we're not doing it for anyone but ourselves. And the result of that is a record that feels remarkably free of any kind of ties to the past or tangible stresses or anxieties or senses of tension. Like a lot of Animal Collective records are built around tension. Even Merryweather Post Pavilion, to a certain extent, the first 2 minutes of that album are incredibly tense until the first song explodes into this euphoric, miasma, right? And there's that element of tension is a really big part of Animal Collective's music, but it's virtually absent here, I would say. This is a record that is exuberant and sunny and bright, and at no stage anything less than utterly cheerful and colorful and just invigorating in so many different ways. It's a record that feels like a long 50-minute exhale where all of the air that is built up can just kind of be let out. And one of the ways in which this manifests into really, really exciting songs is because you have such a diverse and eclectic range of instrumentation that each member of the band, which incidentally, not all 4 members of the band are on every album. So it is really sick that all 4 are here and they're all doing really, really interesting and unique things. Avi's playing at least 8 different instruments. Geologist is playing things like hurdy-gurdy and lap steel and Taishi Goto, and Deacon is really going full bore into his synthesizer explorations that make him one of the most valuable members of the band, and also his particular guitar tones that he loves to channel as well. If you're hearing really beautiful guitar in an Animal Collective record, you're probably hearing Deacon, and he's really, really, really good at that. Panda Bear, it feels like, he, as a drummer, he's always served the song and he's always sort of served the atmosphere that they're trying to create. And so he's often been more understated in certain records where they're going for a more atmospheric vibe. But he's really kinetic in his playing on this album. He has proper fills. He has really, really dynamic and idiosyncratic performances as a drummer across this record. Of course, it being an Animal Collective record as well, Avi and Panda trade lead vocals across certain songs as well. And you have classic Avi songs like Strung with Everything, Prester John, and you have classic Panda songs like Royal and Desire, for instance, which is, I think, if not their best, then one of their best closers ever, an utterly just gorgeous piece of music that almost makes me weep with how beautiful it is. And the whole record has that sense of beauty and fun and funkiness as well, because of how heavy and prominent the rhythm section is compared to how it has been for a long time. Like, even though a record like Centipede Hurts is really, full of nervous energy and muscular violence, essentially, it's also produced really brittly. So it's not going to be for everyone. Whereas the production here is super spacious, and there's really not very many moments where you're left hanging in empty space without something to kind of fill that void. It's a record that's really dynamic, makes the most of the time that it spends in each of these songs, some of which do go upwards of 6, 7, 8 minutes, and never lose you for any amount of those times. In fact, I would say the longer tracks on here are the absolute standouts. I think that Prester John, the lead single, one of the most immediate and catchy and pretty and gorgeous pieces of music the band have put out since Merryweather. Amazing. Strung with Everything, my favorite song here, I think is one of the 5 or 10 best songs that they've ever done. The second half of the song, where they're just kind of like beating into the drums and just kind of start stopping, and Avi is like screaming at certain points. Like, this reminds you, if you've been an Animal Collective fan for as long as I have, this reminds you of that feeling you got when you first heard Feels. Like, there's nothing like it on earth. I mean, what are some of your standout moments and some of the aspects of the sound of this record that you really respond to, Jake?
Well, I think that for me, the 2 standout tracks are 2 that you mentioned. It's Prester John and Royal and Desire. They're the 2, like, I don't really think this album has a weak point or a song that I enjoy significantly less than the others. It is a remarkably consistent experience, which is, again, like, that's sort of the thesis of this segment here, is that Animal Collective stopped being a really big thing there for a while, and I feel like the general critical acclaim of this album and just the artistic broad strokes that it's painted with are so much so that, like, if you haven't been into Animal Collective, there has never been a better time to get into them than right now, because you have this AV side project with Sonic Boom that's like still different enough from the rest of his solo material and Animal Collective stuff that it becomes its own thing. That, like, again, if you just really enjoy psychedelic pop or you really like the Beach Boys, you're probably going to like that a whole lot. And if you dig that, I think there's ample evidence that you might even like something like Time Skiffs even more. And the cool thing about Time Skiffs is that it's sort of like, I feel like Animal Collective sort of drifted off into a far more digital aesthetic as their records sort of went on in, like, the canon of the band, is that, like, with Feels, you sort of really feel that element sort of creeping up on them. And then you have like Strawberry Jam and Merryweather Post Bazillion and Centipede Hurts, which are these very like there's elements of like detritus all over Centipede Hurts. And then you have this album come through, and it's like the most organic feeling album they've ever made. Like you talking about those sort of like tangible instrumental contributions that everyone is giving forward. The guitar tones on here are crisp and warm and pretty. The drumming is fucking fantastic. I'd say it's as impressive as stuff like, I mean, like, it's a very undersold point just because of how like subtle it often is, but I feel like the drumming in Animal Collective is genuinely like the backbone of the entire band's sound. And this is a very like rhythmic album. It's just that that's not at the forefront of the sound. The forefront of the sound is, of course, the melody, which I think on stuff like Prester John, which is like just this, it's like taking a bath in beautiful sound. And the way it just kind of like trails off there at the end for that final minute and a half, where it just sort of seamlessly sort of like builds into Strung with Everything, which also kind of starts in a very similarly like minimal place. It's just an album that has an iron grip on its pacing. Like, these guys make this album like they are guys who have been making albums for more than 20 years now. And you can really feel that. That's the coolest part about it, is that this is an album that does sound like older Animal Collective albums in some respects, but it also feels like it's an album that wouldn't work as well as it does if they didn't have the experience of all the other Animal Collective albums behind them. So like, you can like reduce this and just be like, oh, this sounds a little bit like this. This is, it's not the most original album that the band has made, but it's also a record that relies on the fact that they are experienced, seasoned musicians. But at the same time, it's also like the most youthful album they've made in a long time, just because when you like really crack open the themes of a lot of Animal Collective albums, I feel like Merryweather Post Pavilion and Strawberry Jam are albums that like they have like a darkness in them. There is like a maturity to them talking about like adulthood and like parenthood and a lot in them. And there's not like, this album's not absent of that kind of stuff, but it still feels more, it feels less like they are pigeonholing themselves into one specific moment in their lives, and they're just sort of like untethering themselves to make like being like kind of what you said before, is that they're just sort of free to do whatever they want now that they're at this point in the narrative of the band. And it makes for really emotional content here that is evocative without taking away from the fact that, yeah, this album's kind of a vibe, but it's a strong vibe. In fact, I would say that it's funny that these two albums come out in the same years, that I would actually say that Time Skiffs is more comparable to Person Pitch than it is Reset. Just when it comes to the sound and the warmth of it, just because I feel like Reset is a little bit more defined and like really owes a lot to his influences, and that's not a bad thing. It's, the fact that these two albums aren't like the most original things that they've made are what make them so accessible. That's why I think that, if you've been sleeping on this band for a while, these are two wonderful entry points for you to get into them. I mean, like, if you listen to Time Skiffs and like it, there's no reason that you can't go directly into something like Feels or Merryweather Post Pavilion and enjoy the shit out of it, just because I can't imagine anyone who likes this album would dislike those. Like
Mm.
not on any universe.
I'm gonna make a very incredibly Riley comparison here and say that like Time
Fuck
Skiffs
yeah.
to me is like Animal Collective's Sign, as in the Autechre album.
Yeah,
And
no, absolutely.
I'll unpack what I mean by that. First of all, like it's a kind of resurgence after a band has been very much in the ether, meaning like they've been really in the weeds of like going down their most, unfriendly impulses and exploring them for years on end. And it's like a record that kind of returns to and represents maybe some of the friendliest work they've maybe ever made. It's also a record that gets kind of really cheap comparisons that aren't necessarily unfair, but also miss a lot of it, in the sense that like Sign got compared a lot to like Oversteps and Amber and stuff. I mean, I made some of those comparisons, and that's useful in some sense, but also misses a lot of what's unique about the record. And the same thing can be said about comparing Time Skiffs to something like Feels, where some of the emotionality is there and some of the textures and the nature of like there being such varied instrumentation and the warmth of it. All of those things definitely are shared comparisons, but Time Skiffs is doing something so unique and something so new even for Animal Collective, bringing them into a territory where it's not even necessarily about how approachable it is, but just how much of a full band they sound like they are now, how much they're pulling out the stops to create these tapestries that are dense, but not in the way where Centimeter Hertz is dense, where you're just kind of being overwhelmed with unrecognizable alien sounds, where you're getting given a huge focus on dynamics in terms of all of the dense sounds that you've been given, really eclectic instrumentation that gives so much color and flair to every song. I mean, even the smaller moments, songs that initially, when I first heard them, seemed a little bit like, good but insubstantive, songs like, Car Keys and Passerby and We Go Back and Walker. The more time you spend with the album, the more you notice the little details in these songs, the little things like bass licks or bells that are added, with bells and whistles and little things that make it, little vocal runs, tiny little things that make it feel substantial and make it feel like its own song that holds its own weight with the rest of the record. And I think in that sense, there's really no weak point here. It's an incredibly consistent album. It reaches these points where it had multiple points where it just kind of like has these really long songs towards the middle, like Strung with Everything and Cherokee, where it kind of, you go on a journey with these songs. Like Cherokee especially feels like going on a massive road trip. It feels like you're driving through the sun, for miles and miles and miles and miles, in the same way that Bros off of Person Pitch feels. And you don't really, you lose track of time. You don't really necessarily notice that it's an 8-minute song as much. You're just traveling with Avi and the band and eventually ending up somewhere. It's very hypnotic. It's very, very just relaxing and fulsome at the same time. Then you have like little moments on here that might be easy to overlook initially, but really kind of register as catchy and fun. Songs like Singles, Walker, and We Go Back, both of which I think are Panda songs, and both of which really, really stand out. They have really funky little kind of angular melodies and just really filled out in a way that they don't feel rote or boring, because there's always something interesting happening, either texturally or melodically. And then, I can't praise enough Royal and Desire. It's like a gorgeous song that brings to mind some of Deacon's best solo material on Sleep Cycle, a great underrated album that has a lot of the same warmth and kind of like specifically the song Good House, the last song on that record, one of my favorite Animal Collective related songs in general, has the exact same feel as this one. Just like you're taking a final breath of air outward and you're like, I'm home, essentially. And it's a feeling of home that a great Animal Collective closer can give you, and a lot of the best ones do. And this is as good, if not better at it than any of them. It's just a really, really satisfying, like, and the best thing I can say about this record is that it's so easy to just put it on and just let it play through, and just let it play from start to finish, and not necessarily pay attention to what song you're on, just be completely taken with it the whole time. And that's, it puts it firmly in the upper tier of the Animal Collective discography to me as a longtime fan. And I am really excited because I'm pretty sure they said around the time that they recorded this, they had enough material for 2 albums. And I think we're even going to record 2 albums. I think they did, actually. So we may get a follow-up to this sooner rather than later. That I think,
and even if it's just more of this, I'm kind of okay with that, because the sound is so, like, again, that full band sound of theirs is so multifaceted and so, like, dense and immediate that, like, if it sounds a whole lot like this album, I won't really mind it all that much. I think that they've just reached a point where they're so in lockstep with each other that they can't really put a foot wrong. Like if you made a Ryley core comparison, I'll make a J-core one, and that this project and Closure Continuation have a whole lot in common. This is just like, this is the comeback album that reassures a big fan base of people that they can still do what they've been known for as well as they've ever been able to do it.
Yeah, absolutely. So on that note, shall we rate both of these albums then? Let's start with Panda Bear and Sonic Boom's Reset. Jake, what are your 3 favorite tracks, least favorite track, and rating?
Favorite track on here gotta be Edge of the Edge. Then my other 2 favorites, probably In My Body and Whirlpool. Though shout out to Danger. I also think that's a terrific song as well. Least favorite song, probably Go On, just because the hook isn't my favorite thing in the world, but it's still a beautiful sounding song. And I give the album a 7 out of 10.
All right, my 3 favorite tracks are Every Day, In My Body, and Edge of the Edge. Least favorite track is, God, I honestly don't think I have one, really. Like, cop-out answer, I guess. And yeah, I warmed enough to give this an 8 out of 10. I think a really, really great record that I know for a fact is going to be a big part of my listening rotation for the rest of the year. That gives us an average of 7.5 for Panda Bear and Sonic Boom's Reset. All right, and let's rate the Animal Collective album, Time Skiffs. Jake, what are your 3 favorite tracks, least favorite track, and rating?
Speaking of albums that are going to be in our rotation for the rest of the year, if so much good music didn't come out this year, I probably would have listened to this a hell of a lot more, just because I do really love it a lot. 3 favorites here: Prester John, Royal, and Desire. Have to shout out those 2. Also say out the opener, Dragon Slayer is also a really big grower for me, but God, it's a terrific way to open the record. I got a cop out too. I don't really think this album has a weak link in it. It's again, it doesn't reach maybe the stratospheric highs of something like Feels, but it's just something that is, you know, essentially like faultless in its like ambitions and respect. So yeah, I give this a really, really, really solid 8.5 out of 10.
All right, Morgan gave it a 6. My 3 favorite tracks are Strung with Everything, Royal and Desire, and I think Cherokee. I don't have a least favorite track. Again, this is just, it hits a certain level, it keeps it, it never loses me. It is one of their most satisfying listens from front to back. And I am also going to give it an 8.5 out of 10 as well, which means that we get an average overall of 7.7 for Animal Collective's Time Skiffs. Let us know at home what you think of any of the albums that we have discussed today, the collaborations between Danger Mouth and Black Thought, or the collaborations between Panda Bear and Sonic Boom, or the Animal Collective album that we've finally caught up to and reviewed. We want to hear from you in the comments below. We want to hear what your thoughts are on these very fascinating and really rich releases. If you're listening on Spotify or Apple, you can head on over to the YouTube link in the description and leave us a comment via that method. If you enjoyed the video as well, please consider giving it a like and subscribing to the channel if you have not already. Both of those things do help us an awful lot. If you want to go above and beyond and support us even more, you can hit the join button, and for just $1 a month, you can support the channel directly, become a member of the Jams and Tea family, plus get your name put in the title crawl of every video on this channel. And if you want to recommend us some music to listen to and to talk about, your recommendation will go to the top of the pile. As always though, folks, rock over London, rock on Chicago, All State, you're in good hands.